Lourdes, are you there?
Yes, I am there.
All right. Sorry, we had some technical issues, couldn't connect with you. But Lourdes, as I mentioned to you folks before, and I have worked together between her center and our Center for Emerging Markets. We've done events together, and we are doing this conference jointly with Cornell as well as INSEAD. And in November, Cornell will be organizing an event in New York City, jointly with us and INSEAD, and that will be open to, eventually the idea is to open up all of these events to our communities in the respective locations. Lourdes has done a lot of work on the globalization of companies from Latin America, and in the last few years she's been focused quite a bit on Chinese companies. And I asked Lourdes if she would give us the highlights of the research she's done, and specifically if she could speculate on what the US-China trade war might mean for Chinese companies, the giant Chinese companies that have aspirations themselves to be global leaders, and some of which have already become global leaders, others aspiring to that status. Lourdes, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. He forgot to mention that he was the pioneer doing work in emerging markets, and he is an inspiration for all of us who have followed his leadership. So thank you so much. Really a pleasure for me at Cornell to work with you and to follow your advice and your coaching that you have done for many of us. So thank you very much. As Ravi was saying, at EMI, we published a report on emerging multinational. And I have done, as he said, a lot of work on companies from Latin America. And what we realized in the first report in 2016 is that actually Chinese companies were the ones really jumping ahead by a lot. And I'll show you some data right now. And as a result, with my co-author and Miru, we are now, will be published later this year, this book about the era of Chinese multinationals. Because as Professor Ravi Ramamurthy was saying, they are competing for global dominance. And the trade war is the realization that they are there, and they are in many different, when they were selling mainly shoes, clothes made in China, okay, that was fine with us. When they moved to white goods, and Haier became the #1 white goods producer in the world, okay, but now they are everywhere, laptops, desktops, tablets, smartphones. So I'm just going to give you an idea of where they are. So Chinese companies now are 111 of the global 500 ranking of Fortune. So by revenues, Chinese companies are there. And if we look at the data comparing to the US, Chinese companies took advantage of the global financial crisis of 2008 in the US to grow. And as the previous speaker was saying, Europe reacted first to this Chinese spree of acquisitions in Europe, because also Chinese companies took advantage of the European crisis that happened after the US crisis in 2008. Then if we look at so very few countries are represented in the global 500, and definitely China has a disproportionate high number of companies in the ranking if we compare to either the GDP or the GDP per capita. Another, still some consider emerging market, South Korea has again had a policy of supporting their own companies, and their presence in the global 500 is again very important. But what I said before is that now Chinese companies dominate a number of industries. For instance, banking. Banking was, of course, if we would look at the best banks in the world as the biggest banks in the world, you would always think JP Morgan, Citi, you would think of many others, Morgan Stanley, and so many others. The biggest banks in the world, by revenues, by assets, are 4 out of 5 are Chinese, and the fourth one is French. And the biggest one is ICBC. To give you a number of data from ICBC, is present in 51 countries, is the second biggest one by market capitalization after JP Morgan as well. Last year was almost 4 months without CEO because the CEO became the head of the regulatory body in China, and the salary of the CEO is $100,000. Compare that with the salary of the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, is a big difference. But also engineering and construction, when we think of a big civil construction projects, there are always right now Chinese companies competing, also oil, materials, mining, China Mobile number 3 in telecom by revenues after AT&T and Verizon. And this is more amazing if we look at the average year of the founding year of these companies in the Global 500. The Chinese companies are the youngest. Average founding year 1981 compared to US companies 1926. We also do internationalization, as Ravi was saying. Many are not international yet, but many are international. So here we looked at data from FDI markets that looks at the average number of countries in which companies are present. So we look at the average number of countries in which the companies in the Global 500 of Korea, Japan, US, and China were present. Internationalization is not easy. It takes years to go abroad and very risky. So Chinese companies, very young, they are already in an average of 12 countries. Again, these companies behave differently. We always in business schools teach our students maximize profits, maximize the willingness to pay for a product or a service of your company. So here you are, 74%. So again, we compare the margins of Chinese and US companies in the Global 500. So almost 74% of the Chinese companies are with margins either negative or between 0 and 5%. So US companies, very rightly so, most of them are public, are the blue line, are much more profitable than Chinese companies. We also compared Chinese companies and US companies, blue US, red Chinese in another number of variables. Again, all the ones in the Global 500. So again, profits is the one that strikes the most as being about half the profits of US companies. This is the ranking of 2018 and the data end of 2017, and we compare 2 years, 2016 and 2017. In assets, however, already Chinese companies have more assets than US companies. We compare the same numbers. So there are 126 companies from US in the Global 500. We took the biggest 111 and compared with the 111 of China. And here is part of the explanation. Many of the Chinese companies are still state-owned. So the big Chinese companies, many are state-owned. So as many as 67%, out of which 20% are state-owned and public, such as the bank I mentioned before, ICBC. If we compare this to US companies where almost 80% are public, so in the usual big company in the US is publicly traded, while the usual Chinese big company is still state-owned. Although less than before, we still have that. M&A is usually something, is a leak for the big ones. Here we took at the biggest players in M&A in 2017. The picture in 2018, we already have the data, is different. But in 2016 and 17, China was #2 in announced M&A deals, overseas announced M&A deals. So after the US. The other ones are big players: UK, France, Canada, Italy, Germany, Japan, Singapore, and Switzerland. So again, if we look at the historical data, you see the change after 2008. Again, any variable we look at, 2008 is the turning point. In just 10 years, this tremendous transformation. Here we have the absolute data. Again, US the biggest, but definitely China #1. Unexpected for a country that the average GDP per capita nominal is still at about $9,000 something compared to the huge GDP per capita in the US. These outbound M&As faced increasing restrictions, initially mainly at home. So the Chinese government was worried that this big number of acquisitions were also a way to take assets abroad and put a number of restrictions. For instance, now Chinese companies cannot invest in real estate. So they said in certain areas they cannot. Definitely they can, if they do, in technology, where they still are missing certain things, as we can see with what is happening right now with Huawei. And as the previous speaker said, these companies are facing increased control, and first in Europe, and then now definitely in the US. A cover page of Wall Street Journal, New York Times, almost every day you have a news that increasing trade war, increasing tariffs, or putting restrictions. CFIUS, the organization that overviews acquisitions of the US, has increased the number of people working because they have much more work, because the scrutiny is very serious. Then another thing that we did two things. One, we tend to see products from Chinese companies as cheaper. So, and this is true, this is still true, whether airlines, whether desktops, laptops, air conditioning. So we looked at Chinese products, again in red, in blue, the price of US products. And yes, in most of the categories sold in Amazon or the airline tickets in Expedia the same day and outside sales times. So regular prices of different products and services, Chinese and US companies. Yes, in general, the prices of desktops, Lenovo or Acer are cheaper, or Asus are cheaper than US desktops. However, we start seeing that in laptops, in Lenovo or Huawei in smartphones, the day that we looked at it, it was before Apple had launched the latest iPhone. So that we looked at these prices in middle of 2018. So Huawei was also pushing for prices at the top of the line. So yes, Chinese compete on price and are continuing to compete on price, quality, but we are starting to see that Chinese products are increasing prices. Again, we hear as of late that the average price of so the labor cost in China is increasing. Yes, it's increasing, but yes, still is very competitive. So in these bars, we have in blue the minimum wage of Germany, Korea, US, Japan, Brazil, China, Mexico, and India. China is one of the cheapest. Also, we added the gasoline price and also electricity price. So yes, China's prices have gone up, but they still are very cheap. If we add to that the logistics that are extremely very well organized, and also the productivity and the scale is tremendous, we still have the reality is that labor cost still in China is quite competitive. Again, we have on the other hand Germany or South Korea that are still big exporting countries, and then why they are able to export while the minimum wage is much higher, because productivity per hour of a German worker is the highest in the world. So that's why it's not only competitive based on low minimum wages, but yes, we have hope. Germany's salaries are very high, but the German worker is very competitive, very productive per hour. So now the technology war, trade war or technology war. So then definitely, and I think the previous speaker has explained this very well. So I am going to focus a little bit on the reaction in China. So what has China done? Number one, has accused US of economic terrorism. So, okay, I've been discussing with many Chinese colleagues here in China about the reaction. Some say, okay, I think it's too early to say, it's too early to analyze. Let's look at the first reactions. Some say, you know, I was expecting China to become much more aggressive, and they have not. From what I know about China, China in general is slow when they react. They're slow, they wait, they see, and then they react. The value of the renminbi, in spite of all the rhetoric, has been extremely stable. One of the most stable currencies in the world in the last 11 years, at 6.8. At some point, the last weeks, we have seen the renminbi going down to 6.9. Remains to be seen what they are going to do. Remember that China is a big acquirer in the world. So yes, cheaper renminbi makes products from China cheaper, but then guess what? Since they keep on buying, then their acquisition power also diminishes. Possibilities of things they can do. And they are, so even if they don't say it, what China has in hand can be boycotting products like Apple, iPhone, Qualcomm chips, Starbucks, Nike, Intel. These companies have 20% of the revenues coming from China and others. So we could think China did boycott products from Korea at some point because they had a dispute regarding, I don't know which agreement, and then products like beauty products from Korea are very much valued in China. In a company like Amore Pacific, that the head is a Johnson alum, the market value went down because Chinese boycotted for a while the beauty products from Amore Pacific. This has gone, but yes, Chinese consumers have done that in the past. What others say is that for the moment, Huawei and others depend from some of the chips from Qualcomm, from Intel, but yes, they are pushing, as the previous speaker said, that making China 2025 policy, the idea is to become autonomous. So now this China is accelerating, of course, their autonomy, and they don't want to be in the same situation again. As you know, China is the country that owns most US debt, followed by Japan is number 2. It seems, again, too early to say, but in the last weeks, we have seen that China seems not to be buying US debt. It remains to be seen. The alternatives from a pure financial point of view are not that many. So many experts say no, China will continue buying US debt. Remains to be seen. On the soft side, what China is doing, they have launched in these days, they are saying, President Xi has said, we are into a 15-year battle plan with the US, and this is going to be our new long march. The Chinese always like these metaphors. So the previous long march, now it is going to be the new long march. And of course, China realizes that has to have much more soft power. So China, in my classes, what I say is that China is very disruptive, that China is, we have, in our business schools, we talk all the time, technology is very disruptive. And of course, technology is extremely disruptive. But guess what? China competes with different ways, and China is very disruptive in the markets as well. It's causing disruption. One thing that China does definitely extremely well is this collaboration between government, academia, business, and civil society. It's quite common to have government working with academia, even traveling when they do trips to Latin America. Very often, academic experts join these delegations with government and with business. They have different competitive drivers, and we are in a moment in which we are moving from global to local. So are we moving to a more less global world, as they are saying, slow globalization, this deglobalization? That's something that definitely we are seeing, and we may continue to see in the next days, in the next years, I believe.
Are you done, Lourdes?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay.
Any questions?
Thank you. Okay, we have maybe time for one or two questions. Any? Yes, Galen?
So and it may be in different contexts, but it was interesting to hear the previous speakers say that many things in China happen very, very fast, and then to hear you say that they move very, very slowly. I'm just wondering if you could parse us through that.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, two things. One, what I've seen in my studies on China, what I've shown is that the growth of Chinese companies has been very fast in just 10 years. So if we look at the first slide here, Chinese companies, they were only 20 in the Global 500. So from 20 in 2008, we have now more than 5 times in 10 years. It's not easy to build a huge company, and they have done it in just 10 years. So yes, my first driver is to say speed. Chinese companies are very, very fast. As for reaction, in what I hear from the experts that I've been talking to in the last weeks is that it's not in the Chinese way of thinking to react hastily into, for instance, what is happening right now with the trade war. Okay, as you may know, China preferred as a candidate President Trump versus President Clinton. So they prefer that. So now they find themselves that, yes, President Trump is having a much more confrontational attitude towards China than before. So yes, they are reacting in this matter more slowly, or openly more slowly. So what we see is that so far they have lacked a little bit of aggressivity that President Trump has shown. So then they are more calm. That doesn't mean that they are not doing things. Another possible reaction, as you know, and has been in the press, is to stop, to not to export rare earths that are needed for many, for the silicon, for the silicon components of any phone or any technology product. But we don't know that. They have not said we are going to boycott US products. They have not said we are going to stop exporting rare earths that are very important for manufacturing technological products.
Lourdes, can you just give us a sort of a bottom line answer to whether the trade war is going to slow the growth and international expansion of these large Chinese companies?
Yeah. So since we are writing the book, and the manuscript is due June 15, we are in tremendous discussions with my co-author Anne to decide what are we going to say. So our opinion is to say that no choice, the US expansion of Chinese companies that are present in many, many different industries is going to slow down. It's no choice because the scrutiny for acquisitions and the tariffs, etc. So, but already the growth in investments, if we look at outward foreign direct investment data from China, since the Belt and Road Initiative was launched 5 years ago, the investments in the Belt and Road countries has increased 50%. So if we look again, 2018 was a year in which trade has slowed in the world, investments have slowed, Chinese the same, and definitely in Europe, US have gone down and is everywhere in the press. However, investments in the Middle East and in BRIC countries, in Belt and Road Initiative countries, has increased more than 50%, obviously from a very low starting point. But yes, my opinion is that Chinese companies will continue expanding in Africa. The expansion in Africa is very often done by government loans, so does not appear in the OFDI data. So Africa is not easy to study how much investments are in Africa. So investments in Africa will continue, in Southeast Asia will continue, and in Asia in general will continue. We have seen President Xi visiting President Putin. State Grid, the biggest electricity company in the world, second biggest company in the world, they have already done interconnection of the different grids between China, Russia, and other Asian countries. So that expansion will definitely continue. And also in peripheral countries in Europe, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary. So UK, they are extremely very, investments in UK are very big, and UK will leave the European Union and will continue that. Less so in mainland meaning France, Germany, because the scrutiny will be much more important.
Got it. So it's a mixed bag, is what you're saying. Thank you, Lourdes. Thank you so much, and thank you for accommodating our glitches here.
Thank you.
Thank you.